Cool. Thank you very much. Let me get my timer set up here so I know when I'm running over on you. So, oh no, where did my screen go? There we go. All right. So, thank you very much. My name is Jeff Fritz, and yes, the .NET Developer Outreach Group here is a new group at Microsoft, and we're focused on talking about .NET Core, .NET in general, and how you can use it now everywhere. We like to say you can use it from 64K to 64 gig. Do I have screens here? I got to go back over to 3. There we go. So we like to say that you can now use .NET on devices that scale anywhere from 64K to 64 gig. Now 64K is a little bit of an exaggeration, right? Nobody has a device that has 64K in it, right? Maybe a watch, maybe? No, you probably have at least a meg of RAM in there, right? Even a Raspberry Pi has a meg of RAM now. But you can run .NET on a Raspberry Pi. You can run .NET all the way up to the cloud and have gigs and gigs of servers running and maintaining your software. .NET has come a long way. A long time ago, we had verticals that looked like this. A long time ago, what am I saying? 2015, 2014, where we had the Windows desktop with a fat app model and framework and runtime. Windows Store was another vertical with a different programming model because you wanted to deploy to Windows 8 or Windows 10, and you had a different app model with a different framework that you would send up to the store, and we'd put a runtime around it and make it available for installation from the store. The phone was even different again, and you had to program differently for that. ASP.NET 4 on the server, right, has this very desktop-flavored framework. You'd get things like WinForms still available when you'd be working with your web forms or MVC application. Well, now we're talking about ASP.NET Core on the server with a very thin app model, a decent-sized framework that supports it, and a very thin runtime. We want to get you to a small server-side model so you can deploy quickly and get it up running just as quickly. It's an exciting time here in 2016 for .NET. The .NET framework has been enhanced. It's changing, and we're adding new features, we're adding new runtimes. You've got these two main points that Microsoft is focused on: modern devices and modern cloud. So we've got Universal Windows Platform. When you want to build premier applications for Windows clients, you can use Universal Windows Platform to build with XAML, to build with HTML, and deploy to a store, and they're available on phones, they're available on tablets, and other PCs. Now we have Xamarin in the box, right? We can work with Xamarin to build things for iOS and Android, even Mac OS or OS X or whatever they want to call it tomorrow. You can use Xamarin to build and deploy to those environments. We're investing now in this thing called .NET Core, where we're going to have a cross-platform capable, native, high-performance .NET, whether you're programming on Windows, Linux, or Mac OS. I'm going to keep calling it Mac OS. They changed the name on me. I'm going to call it that throughout the presentation. And then on the server, when you want to write your server-side applications, we're going to have ASP.NET Core there for you, a brand new application model based on MVC, completely rewritten to enable you to build these fast applications that work anywhere. So the family gets bigger with .NET Framework today, right? We have the .NET Framework. You're going to use that for building your applications that run on Windows. This is what you've seen for the last 15 years. You're probably familiar with, and it works great. We've got lots of innovation that's been running on that. We brought Xamarin into the mix now. You can do your cross-platform, open-source, mono-based runtime for iOS, OS X, Mac OS, Android devices, compile, and it runs everywhere. And now .NET Core comes into the middle. This is the one that we're really excited about. We've spent a lot of time, invested a lot of money in the development of, and I want to make sure that you know more about it because it's cross-platform, open source. That's a key thing here. Microsoft and open source is something that sounds new, but we've been doing this for a while. You're going to have modern apps that you can build with .NET Core for Windows servers, Mac OS, and Linux. Now, when you run with these frameworks, you can distribute those frameworks differently with each one of these models. Of course, the .NET framework comes with Windows. When you install a new version of Windows, when you install a new version of Visual Studio, there's a new version of the .NET framework that comes with it. All right? That's the only way you get a new version of the base class library and runtimes on Windows. You may see a Patch Tuesday where we'll deploy fixes, but really, you get a full version of .NET when there's a new version of Windows. Xamarin, of course, if you're building an iOS or Android app, you don't have a runtime on those devices. So we don't have a way to reference a base class library on your iPhone. So we need to bundle up those capabilities in that library, in that runtime, and make it all packaged and send it up to the store as one bundle. With .NET Core, we like that idea of being able to package and ship things like that as one whole unit. And we're going to allow you to package and ship your .NET framework with .NET Core to your server, to your Windows clients, so that you can have it isolated and use only those features you need. Now, of course, when you're working with these 3 different versions of .NET, there's a couple different app models that come into play, right? So where are my WPF and Windows Forms developers in the room? I know there's some of you here. Okay, I'm seeing maybe 10% of the room. Okay, that's fine. Nothing to be afraid of, nothing to be ashamed of. How about classic ASP.NET, right? People using Web Forms, MVC, SignalR, Web API. There we go. There's a good size of the crowd, about half the crowd. Now, who's working with Xamarin? iOS and Android and that stuff? Cool. All right, so I see about 10% there. And who's starting on UWP, Universal Windows Platform? Okay, 1 person. 2. Okay. Wow. Hey, folks in the back, there's plenty of room over here. If we can defrag a little bit over here, there's seats over here you can sneak into. And I'm jealous of these guys sitting over here on the couch, man. They got prime seats over here. Got some good VIP tickets over there, let me tell you. Wish I could sit down at a coffee table and just present. So listen, whether you're using .NET Framework, .NET Core, or Xamarin, you have this common infrastructure that you can reference. You're going to have the same compilers. You're going to have the same languages, C#, VB, and F# that you can use everywhere, okay? And we're going to share our runtime components. These are important things so that you have one .NET model. And that's an ongoing theme you're going to see us invest in here over the next year, where we want to get back to one .NET model, right? .NET is really fractured over the past few years. We had some folks that said they were doing WPF and Windows Forms, and other folks, not many, who were doing UWP. These are different frameworks, as we saw earlier, and you had to learn different language constructs to work with things because there were some entries in the base class library for one that aren't available for others. So now you had to train your brain appropriately, even though you're programming in C#, to use those models differently. And then reusing code. This was a nightmare for me. When I would write a class library that had some sort of piece of business logic in it, right? Maybe I'm calculating taxes for my accounting software or doing some business process around some pharmaceutical data. And I wanted to put that into a common class library that I wanted to share between my server application and my UWP application. I had to have different implementations of it. And we started talking about this thing called a portable class library. Anybody write portable class libraries here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, not many. This whole side of the room, they haven't done any of that stuff. All right, fine. Let me tell you a thing about portable class libraries. Portable class libraries are a project model inside Visual Studio that you could start up. It looked like a class library, but before you could build your application, there was a series of checkboxes. Hey, where are you going to be sending this class library to be run? Is it going to be on Windows Phone, Windows 8, Windows 10, Xbox? When I first saw that Xbox checkbox, I was like, oh my gosh, Daddy's coding for Xbox. This is amazing. But it wasn't any different than programming for anything else. It was just another target for my class library. But I had different capabilities available to me. As I added more checks to that checkbox list, it reduced the set of features that I could use for .NET. So I had these different implementations I then had to spin off that were appropriate for my Xamarin application, my Windows Phone application, even Xbox if I wanted to send stuff over there. It was different. So we had these different APIs that weren't available on all platforms. I mean, think about it. When you try and access the registry on Windows Forms, great, it's there. It's certainly not there on your iPhone. So you had to work with your configuration type things differently. Or even system drawing to get to the colors. They're not all available on all the platforms. So you had to target this smaller denominator to start to reuse code. And you had 3+1 base class libraries. I'm not smart enough to keep all that in my head and juggle back and forth between these. I had to rely on my editor, Visual Studio, to help me know when I could use features on different environments. And as we bring on new platforms, we needed new implementations for each platform, and then they were aligned with ship cycles, right? And this is the thing that I really didn't like, and unfortunately it was before I joined Microsoft. I had to wait for a new version of Windows or a new version of Visual Studio so I could start to target that next set of environments, right? And that's, in today's world, that's not fast enough. I need my tools to evolve at the same pace as the internet, at the same pace as those other companies out there that are building devices, that are building IoT capabilities into their little circuit boards that I want to target. So we need to evolve faster. So what we're working on, the .NET of tomorrow, still has these three models up at the top: .NET Framework, .NET Core, Xamarin. But we're going to introduce something called the .NET Standard Library. And it's not something that Frodo is taking to Mount Doom in Mordor. It is one library to rule them all. This is a common set of APIs that you're going to be able to use that is now, instead of the least common denominator in that PCL model, it's the most common. We're going to make sure that every one of these frameworks implements those features in the standard library so that you can be assured it works everywhere, right? We're turning things around here, and we're going to allow you to reference implementations in your code, and then as you go to compile for those appropriate environments, full implementations will be put in place in a contract manner. So your code only references a reference implementation. The full implementation comes in later, so when you're ready to deploy, it all gets mashed together and works appropriately for those environments. So you have the same API on every platform. You get to master one library and not some platform, right? How many people in here spent time learning Windows Phone? Okay, I only see 2 or 3. And once again, this side, are you asleep on me here? Can we get some coffee over here? These guys, I'm not sure. So look, the .NET Standard then can grow because you're learning one library. We can add features that are common to all runtimes, and everybody gets them, and you just have to learn that one thing. This means that when you want to take your Windows application and start programming it on the web, or get it ready to go to iOS or Android with Xamarin, you already know all the features that you can work with and use there, right? We can innovate faster on libraries, our common infrastructure and tools. It took us a long time to build that Roslyn compiler, but it works everywhere. And it's taken us a long time to innovate on our package manager because we want to make sure that it works everywhere. So we've got this future innovation concept that we're looking at, and we're going to innovate across all of .NET with our .NET Standard Library and then our common infrastructure tools. But we're also going to give you those editor tools, I've started calling them studio tools, like Visual Studio Code, and Xamarin Studio that you can use wherever you are that you need to develop .NET code, right? On Windows, use full Visual Studio. On Mac OS, use Xamarin Studio. And whether you're on either or even Linux, use Visual Studio Code. We're going to continue then to allow our groups that focus on the .NET framework on Windows, .NET Core, and Xamarin, we're going to allow them to continue innovating on their app models. And they don't have to worry about innovating on that standard library, the standard features. So now we're isolating the work to change the entire .NET framework in our groups that are responsible for these client libraries. These client app models can focus on their respective runtimes, frameworks. I mean, we're about to ship .NET Core here in June, and our ASP.NET team hasn't written any code to build and manage web content in months because they're busy working on .NET. Now, okay, that's a trade-off, but going forward, they can focus on the web, right? Now, something happened here within the last few months that I want to make sure that everybody's aware of. Now, with the advent of .NET Core, we introduced something called Project JSON. Anybody hear of Project JSON? You guys know what this is? Hey, I got some hands up on this side of the room. All right. So Project JSON, I only saw about a third of the room put their hands up. Project JSON was the new project configuration file that we were using for .NET Core. It gave us a way to describe your package references, the ways that you wanted us to compile, the things you wanted us to include and exclude from the compilation process, and it gave us a way to hook up post-build events very easily in a JSON file that was human readable and editable. It worked great for working with source control. You could commit that JSON file and see those changes very easily. And people really liked this because it got away from that MS build model of every file is listed in property groups, and here's the way that the compiler runs. So there was a lot of people that really liked Project JSON. But Project JSON had its own problems. As we started working with this project format, we realized that it's not like the rest of the .NET universe, right? When we look at the .NET universe and you open a project, you're opening a CS proj or a VB proj file. And that's in MS build format. And it's optimized for Visual Studio to configure and use. So Visual Studio starts putting things into there about how to work with the debugger, how to work with the profilers. And when we talk about bringing those features from Project JSON in and make them compatible with those other projects that you already have out there, the class libraries, the Windows Forms apps, the WPF apps, it's daunting. There's a lot in there that we need to make Project JSON aware of, and we need to make all of those projects aware of from Project JSON capable projects. Because another target of Project JSON was you could actually build your project, and instead of your output being a DLL, you could get out a NuGet package. So cool features, but to get that integrated and into those other project environments was really, really hard. And it was going to take us the better part of another year to make it compatible with everything. So moving forward, we're going to keep things in MS build format. We're going to go back to XML, and we're going to enhance the MS build format, the CS proj file format, so that it has all those features that we learned about in the last year of working with Project JSON, so that you have a great experience. MS build and your project files become a lot easier to manage, okay? And we'll get that same portability of our build process that we had in Project JSON across all these different tools, whether it's the two Visual Studios, Xamarin Studio, or even on the command prompt. And the command prompt is very important for us because as we build things for .NET and we want to make it cross-platform capable, we need to have a common place to execute everything. So the command prompt actually works great for us because everybody's got a command prompt, right? So if we start building command prompt first tools and a command line interface, then we can wrap that capability with the appropriate UI tools for Visual Studio Code, Xamarin Studio, and it just works. Everybody has the same thing everywhere. Very cool, and it now gives us one project. Easy to manage and easy to extend going forward. So let's talk about the .NET framework. The .NET Framework it's your premier platform for building desktop applications, right? So we've done some new things here in 2016. We've got another version that's been released, 4.6.2, I believe is the framework version. We've got cryptography enhancements built into there, updates for click-once deployment. Anybody doing click-once deployment? Oh, great, about half the room. So TLS, Transport Layer Security, 1.1 and 1.2 support. So that's important to make sure you're delivering secure content. WPF improvements, per monitor DPI. This was something that always killed me because I have multiple monitors at home. And I've got my Surface Pro, and it's at a different DPI than my external monitors. And when I would drag applications from here to over there, it would change shape, right? Anybody see this in their applications? I see some people nodding. It would change shape and grow and shrink. That's fixed in the next version of WPF. Very cool. And we've released a new version of Visual Studio called VS15. That's not confusing. I was working on the Visual Studio team at the time when they said, okay, we're going to release a preview of VS, and we're going to call it VS15. And it took me a better part of a week to realize I had VS 2015 and VS15. So you're not alone if you see that and kind of go, what? Fortunately, I think we're going to see this number shift change here because, right, the next version after VS15 will be VS 18. What the heck is this? Even my kindergartner knows that it's VS 16. And it probably won't be released until after 2016. Ay, joda. We're going to take a look at some of these cool features in VS15 in a moment. But for the XAML folks that are out there, we've got people out here that write a lot of XAML, right? Right? Okay. I hear one person wooing and one person in the back over here with their hand up. And this whole side is, show me the ASP.NET stuff. I'm not a big XAML person. Personally, when I look at XAML, I'm a long-time web developer. I look at it and I'm thinking, where are my divs and spans? I want to write CSS, I want to write JavaScript, and there's all this angle bracket stuff with attributes that I don't know. But what I do know is that in the new VS15, that cool feature that I can do with the web in previous versions of Visual Studio, where I can edit my web page and continue and see my changes just by refreshing my browser, that gets really easy to do now in VS15. First time I saw it, I thought, okay, now I can start using UWP because I can grok this. This is something easy for me to understand. Project Centennial we introduced, right? You guys heard of Project Centennial? No. Cool. Let me explain. Project Centennial is the way that you're going to be able to take your WPF and Windows Forms apps, and with .NET being around since 2001, who doesn't have Windows Forms and WPF apps, legacy apps laying around, right? So you're going to be able to take them and recompile them as a UWP app, send them up to the Windows Store, or even send them to your enterprise store locally so you can deploy and manage them. Very, very cool. That's in preview right now. You can go out on the web and download that. And there's going to be some more XAML language service updates coming soon. Now, we're not stopping with Visual Studio 2015. You're going to continue to see updates there. In the Update 2 wave that we released in mid-April, there were new .NET native tools, 600 corrections and performance fixes, a meta package with fixes to .NET Core libraries. This is the cool thing that I like. Support for HoloLens and Xbox development for Visual Studio 2015, right? I mean, I'm still baffled that I can program for an Xbox. Really cool. Smoother package creation workflow. That's important because as you want to start sharing your libraries and capabilities across all of your projects, you want to start building NuGet packages. All right, so let's take a look at this XAML edit and continue functionality. So I'm going to drop out here and run over to, okay. I might have a little problem. I've got a collection of Visual Studios here. 2013, 2015, 15, code. Anybody know what the green one is? What was it? This is the daily build of Visual Studio Code. Yeah, that's how crazy I am. I want to use the latest and greatest every day. So, all right, let's take a look. This is Visual Studio 15. And let me change projects here. I have a little calculator, and I've got a cool little designer that appears as usual when I'm building with WPF. And this is WPF XAML, right? This also works for Windows 8, Windows 10, but it doesn't matter which version of the XAML designer and tools you're using, you'll get this same capability. I'm going to start and debug my application, and after a second of compiling here, I'm going to get a little calculator that pops up. There it is. It's very sophisticated. And I've got this cool new set of buttons here, right? This is something that we haven't had before. But I can now click in and select things here. And just like I would have inside of my browser, I can now see where in the XAML control tree that object is, right? Okay. Someone down here is excited about this. I guess that's my only XAML developer here in the room. Cool. Okay. All right, so now I can see where that is. That's pretty neat, right? So there's my text box. And I can right-click, and I can even say Show Properties, and it'll show me the properties over here for that. Nice. But that's my text box up here. You know what? I want to go grab this delete button. Let's see where that delete button is. So this one, find that for me. Here it is. Right, so view source, and it's going to jump me right to the delete button here. That's nice, and I can see, you know, here's all the properties that are set on that. And you know what, that font size is a little small. I'm going to change that to 16. Did you see it? Did you see it? Let's get a little bit crazier. Right? So I've got edit and continue. I've got the ability to change and immediately see those properties reflected in live applications when I'm building things with XAML. Because personally, I don't know these tags, but I can start building some of them, and I can start working with these attributes and seeing how they update my UI. And as a trial and as a developer who needs to try and compare and retry these things, this is very helpful for me, who's a newbie to XAML. Okay? So that's edit and continue with XAML. So great new tool to allow you to debug and work with your XAML code much, much easier. All right, let me go back to the slides. There it is. All right. What are we doing about languages? We continue to invest in our .NET languages. We all know C# is very, very popular. It's broadly used, deeply loved, right? Heck, my Twitter account is C# Fritz, okay? Does that tell you something? It's not VB Fritz, it's C#. And we've still got Visual Basic out there, and we're going to continue to invest in it. It's the same great language that you've been using for years and years and years. In fact, it's at version 14 right now, right? It continues to grow and change, and it gives you all that great productivity in Visual Studio. And F# is the latest language on the block that we have here. Functional first, harmonized with .NET. I love that word, harmonized. So we support F# with .NET Framework and with Xamarin. And at Build this year, we announced we're supporting F# with .NET Core. It's the second language to get into .NET Core. Visual Basic isn't there yet. It will be after RTM. But F# can now be used with .NET Core. Do we have F# developers in the room? 1, 2. Okay. All right. They're out there. Trust me. It's a great language, and they'll let you know it's a great language and how easy it is to get started with. So let's take a look. I'm going to show you one of the new features in C# 7, and I'm going to show you a little bit about F# in .NET Core. So let's go over back to Visual Studio, and I'm going to open my other project. This is C# 7. And the feature that I want to show you here is called pattern matching. So one of the new features here, you may have a function in your project that looks something like this, where you're going to tally across a collection of things, right? You want to sum and count and do some work on a collection. And you have to write this defensive coding here, right? Well, I'm going to sum and count the contents of this collection if it is an integer. And you end up allocating a separate variable there just so you can cast to an integer if it is one, and then do your work. And that's a little annoying, okay? I've allocated extra memory just for the purposes of doing this if statement. So what if we could get rid of this extra statement and this extra cast right here that I had to write and maintain? So with pattern matching, what I can do is actually say that. So if v is int, name it I. Put it in the I variable, and then I will continue to be available to me throughout the rest of my function. So this is pattern matching. We can start to do checks on these things and put it into other variables while you're working, okay? And you're going to see this feature flow down into Visual Basic as we start to come closer to completion of Visual Studio 15. So it's an easy concept to see in this small model here, but there's more features coming in the future. You can actually light this feature up right now if you download the Visual Studio 15 preview. There's directions in the release notes about how to update your project to support this and a few other C# 7 features. Let me show you F#. So I'm going to run over here to, let's open a command prompt, because all cool developers these days use the command prompt. At least that's what they tell me. So I'm going to go into my dev folder, and I'm going to make a folder called VS Live. And now I'm going to run my .NET command line. Okay, so this is for .NET Core. This is how we get started building new applications. I have my .NET command line tools. You can see this is preview 2702. This is the RC2 version of the .NET command line tools. It's in preview 1 because our tools are all in preview mode, but the libraries and functionality are in RC. More on that as we talk about .NET Core. But you can see I'm running on Windows. I'm all set up for running on Windows x64. I can build a new project. Let me get into my VS Live here. By just saying .NET New. But there's other features behind .NET New. I can specify the type of project. I can specify the language that I want my new .NET project to be started with. So let's start a project in F#. It's already done creating. I mean, it's a simple little project here with a little NuGet config file. I can restore my packages for this by saying .NET restore, and it's going to go and build out and grab. F# is currently in daily build mode, so it's got a bunch of projects that it's going to bring in, bunch of packages it's going to bring in from the daily repository and configure my project. All right. I get information about the feeds used, where I went and fetched all of my NuGet packages. And now I can say .NET run. You can see it's compiling my project for the .NET Standard version 1.5. This is the version that's focused on just .NET Core and the .NET Framework, and I get a hello world coming out. Simple. It's an initial template project, but when we do look at, it is F#. So F# now running in .NET Core, and there's much more coming with this as we're going to enable F# to work cross-platform with .NET Core, with ASP.NET Core as well. So ongoing work there. All right? So let me roll over. Actually, while I've got you here in .NET Core, I already showed you .NET Info, and that I have 2702 here. Now, this is a command line tool, and one of the things that I talked about earlier is that the .NET Core tools, we want to be able to lift and put down with your application as need be, right? So I've got a command line tool here, and it's obvious it's available on my path, and I've wandered around, and it's still available to me, and I see the same version. But we want to make this portable as well. So if I go into my .NET, where is it? .NET Update folder, I've got another version of .NET here that I've brought along with me. If I run .NET Info here, this is 3067. So I have two different versions of the .NET runtime running on my machine. And this is important going forward because as the packages change in advance, as .NET Standard evolves, you don't want to be trapped in that problem that you may have had with WPF in the past where you've upgraded Windows and you've applied a patch, and now that old version of WPF that you were using isn't compatible with the new version you installed because there's a breaking security change in there, right? And because Windows installs the .NET framework and it's available to all applications, and you can't have these isolated framework versions, some applications work, some applications don't work, and it's going to be up to you to go through and find it. By delivering the .NET Core framework and tools where you need it, when you need it, you now have that isolation so that you can change the .NET framework for your applications when you need to change it for your applications. So it's not a global change. Hosting providers really like this because they don't have to coordinate all of their customers on the same server so that they get the new version all at the same time. So that's a little bit about the portability of .NET Core. Let me go back over to the slides. Productivity. Who's used FxCop in the past? Okay. Notice that it's a number of the people who've been around for a little bit like me. FxCop has been around for a long time, and really we haven't seen any updates since version 2 of the .NET. That's like 2005. We've brought it back as a concept with something called Roslyn analyzers. So you'll get live analysis as you type. You don't have to wait for FxCop to run in the background. Now, there's some third-party tools that you can get and install with Visual Studio that will give you this feature. But we're doing this a little bit differently, and I think it's something that you might be interested in. We'll see this in a demo after I talk about the next piece, the C# REPL, right? This is an interactive window that you can execute C# code in so that you can test and verify that things work before you put it into your code, right? If you wanted to test some code that you wrote in C#, in the past you'd have to go out to Notepad, write it down, save it to disk, and then break out CSC and compile it. Who remembers how to use CSC? Certainly not me. I'm all Visual Studio these days. I had to go dig up CSC and remember how to use it, right? The C# compiler. But now you can do it in Visual Studio. So let me go back over and show you now a little bit about analyzers and the C# REPL. So I'm back here in VS15, and I'm going to take a look at an exception class that I wrote. Now, I haven't added any features to this because I wanted to stay as simple as possible, really show you just the basics here. And it's an exception class, no big deal, right? If I start adding these analyzers into my project, and analyzers are deployed as NuGet packages. So I'm going to actually add in, let me add system runtime analyzers, this one. There it goes, yes. And I'm also going to add Microsoft, there it is, API design guidelines. Now, if you're the chief software architect at your organization, you may be interested in building and deploying your own analyzers. We have instructions about how you can get involved and start writing these. And what you may have already seen is that I'm deploying these as NuGet packages. These aren't something that you install in Visual Studio and then you have to flip switches to enable and disable for each one of your developers that are on your team. I've added these into my project, and they're now available as references up here. Check it out. I have an analyzers node in my tree, and I can see my API design guidelines here. These are all the different rules that you may have had in the past with FxCop or some other static analysis tool to go through and review your code. So let me go back over to my exception class. And you can see I've already got a green squiggle here, right? Squiggle, that's a technical term, right? So it's already telling me that exceptions should be public, and it's giving me the option to fix it. So if I do a control period, not up there, down here, right? I've got some instructions here of what I could do. I don't want to suppress. I can implement my standard exception constructors. That's one thing, sure. I can make the exception public. So it's showing me a preview of here's how I'm going to change your code. And I can preview those changes before, and I can fix all occurrences across this. But what's really neat for me is there's actually a link here to the documentation as to why you want to do these things. So the folks that are building those analyzers can provide, thank you, hey, we got some applause over here, all right. Here's why you should abide by this practice, right? And these are tips that'll help make your code more easily reusable. They'll make it save on memory or processor usage, and in general, make you a good programming citizen, right? And let's face it, when we're programming, we shouldn't be caring so much about how I'm doing and reading the code that I'm writing right now, but how the next person is going to read and consume the code that you're writing right now, right? So some information there. Of course, let me go through and I'm going to make this public. Now, the other thing that it's complaining about here, it's also saying implement these standard exception constructors, and it's saying it's CA 1032. And this is only coming up as a green squiggle, right? And the green squiggles, those are warnings, right? The compiler isn't going to stop and say, fix this or I'm not letting you compile. But I can actually come in over here. Let me find that 1032. Where is he? This one maybe? 1032? No, let me try the next one. Did I miss it up top? I bet you I missed it. There it is, 1032. I can right-click on this and I can say, set my priority. And here's the different information that I can set for how the compiler is going to interact with this analyzer in my project. So I can actually make this an error. And now that green underline is going to turn into a red underline. And it's going to fail my build because I'm not abiding by that analyzer. So you, as the chief software architect, the team lead for your project, maybe you lead an open source project, implement your analyzers, reference them in your application, and they'll be enforced on build, on code submission, on pull requests into your project before it even gets to you, and you need to go back and tap Skippy on the shoulder and say, buddy, come on, breaking my build here, right? Good things. Improves your productivity, improves team morale because you don't have to go talk to Skippy. Can you put it at the solution level is the question down here. No, it's at the project level. So, because, I mean, let's face it, you may want to maintain different rules for different projects. Good question, thank you. I'm sorry, I got a question over here? If you have lots and lots of projects, how do you apply that same set of rules to all of them? Check this out. This may get to a little bit of what you're talking about. If I manage NuGet packages for solution, when I look at this, inside my new NuGet package manager, I can now flip checkboxes for all of those projects that I want to install this into and click install once, and it'll update all of the projects. Does that help get you to where you need to be for installing at solution level? It's not really at solution level. Yeah, you want the settings to be at the solution level, but you'll be able to get it into all of your projects, as the question over here was referencing. Yeah, you're going to need to maintain that separately. All right, let me move on to a little bit more here. So that's a little bit about productivity. Some quick notes about our Xamarin updates, right? Microsoft bought Xamarin. Let's start there, right? That's pretty cool. The Xamarin SDK is now open source, and it's part of the .NET Foundation, right? So everybody can get access to it. We're going to support it long term, and you're going to be able to do great things with it in the future with no licensing hooks. We're updating Xamarin Forms. There's great new features coming in Xamarin Forms going forward. Of course, our fruity friends from California had their press release yesterday, their big conference where they announced new features. We're going to be making advancements to support that as well. We have an iOS simulator that we're introducing that does remoting to bring that user interface from an iPhone, from an iPad, to your Windows machine so you can work with it and test it there. Test recorder for Visual Studio, so you can build your tests, record, and play them back. And we're also working on integrating Visual Studio Team Services Hockey app and the test cloud from Xamarin so that you can deploy and manage those deployments really easy, especially when you're doing tests. .NET Core, really important, like I've been talking about. It's open source, cross-platform .NET runtime and library. I already talked about .NET Standard. High performance, including native compilation. You'll see more about native compilation in the next 6 months as we start moving on those initiatives. ASP.NET Core, of course, is built on top of that. It used to be called ASP.NET 5 because 5 is one more than 4. But it's not. It's a reinvention, right? It's a rebuild. So we ditched the number 5 and we rebranded it as ASP.NET Core so that you knew, just from looking at it, that it's something different. It's not compatible with ASP.NET 4 unless you start really working with portable class libraries, .NET Standard Library, to get that going across. So ASP.NET Core and the modern web have taken some interesting concepts and designs. We want it to be completely modular, right? And this is true for .NET Core as well. You're going to deploy as packages. You're going to pull these together, opt into just those features you need. We're going to give you a faster development cycle. You're going to be able to bring in, compile, and run, not even compile, save and run without seeing a compile step in the background. Use whatever editor you want. If you want to use Visual Studio Code, Visual Studio, VI. Anybody in the room like VI? Okay, fantastic. I'm a VI user. Emacs? Sorry. No, we support Emacs, we do. VI, Emacs, they're kind of, anyways. So cross-platform, that's a big important thing for us because we're hearing more and more from our customers that they want to be able to run things in Docker containers so that you can get things up and running very, very quickly, right? When you start up a VM, it sometimes takes a couple minutes to build up a whole operating system, launch, run your web server, and start serving content. But with a Docker container, we can bring down that startup time to seconds. So it was important to us that we get cross-platform so we can run on Linux and get into those Docker containers. Open source with contributions. This is kind of the tricky thing that folks say, Microsoft, open source? Their lawyers must have had fun as that question. No, not really. .NET has actually been open source from the beginning. Check it out. 2001, we launched .NET, and we had this thing called shared source, right? You could get the source for .NET if you were an educational institution, a research institution, and you went through and signed a bunch of NDAs. But really, what business wants to do that? In 2004, our friends at Xamarin started building the Mono project, right? They weren't even Xamarin at the point. They were off with Novell, and they built the Mono project, an open source implementation of .NET based on the specifications that we published. In 2008, we actually published the reference source for .NET. If you go to sourceof.net on the web, it'll route you around and you'll get to referencesource.microsoft.com, and you can see the source code for all of the base class library for .NET 4.5, .NET 4.6, and 4.6.1. Really cool. You can get the source code to ASP.NET Web Forms if you want to see it. So that's available for you, but it's a view-only mechanism, and that's not really the spirit of open source. In 2012, we started open sourcing parts of ASP.NET. MVC, Web API, SignalR, all of these are open source first and accepting pull requests. You can submit changes. TypeScript came out that year as well. In 2014, we introduced the .NET Foundation to help support .NET open source projects. We introduced .NET Core, and Roslyn was published. And Roslyn is open source. Today, .NET Core is available everywhere. We moved Xamarin, the Xamarin libraries. We moved, Mono, of course, was already open source, but now Xamarin is open source as well. And the .NET Core, RTM, is coming up. So what does this mean when you're Microsoft and you're open source? We're going to continue to support the exact same way those features that are in the box with Visual Studio. You'll get the same level of support no matter who submitted the code for that feature inside Visual Studio. You get the same licenses, the same support that you get when you buy Visual Studio. You can download the source if you'd like. You can make new features. But if you submit a pull request, if you submit code to us, your code is going to go through the same rigorous testing and standards that all of the Microsoft engineers go through when they submit code to us. So this way we can maintain that standard that we expect from our product that we ship to you. So the source code's available for you to use and reference. You can contribute, grow your own project features, make your own flavors of these things. If you don't like the way that MVC works or Razor works, take the source code, fork it, and build your own thing. It's up to you. Build your own community around it. .NET is developed in the open. You can go to .net.github.io. We've got tremendous community momentum. 175 repositories, more than 18,000 contributors. And I consider a contributor somebody who's opening an issue, sending a pull request, commenting on an issue, watching a repository so that they can participate in conversations. More than 18,000 folks are working with us. And more than 1,300 organizations represented by those 18,000 folks. That's a lot of different organizations that are spending time working with us as stakeholders to make .NET better for everyone. And the results are amazing. Performance records have been broken for .NET Core. The new ASP.NET Web Server has a 6 times better performance than Node.js, right? 40% of that performance improvement came from a community member, okay? That's tremendous about what we're doing with the community. The .NET Foundation supports all of these projects. We want to give them the support they need for licenses, trademarks, patents, be able to mentor and give them the visibility they need, the support for hosting and code signing, all of those secrets that you have as a project maintainer that can be difficult to really handle without engaging a lawyer or an accountant. The .NET Foundation will reach out and help you. So Mono is now a member of the .NET Foundation, as well as the Xamarin SDK. And our source code is very, very healthy. We pulled these numbers from GitHub, looking at just the public data that's available out there. The top left graph, this is a list of the pull requests that we've received per month, per organization. And you can see we're on a steady growth pattern there. But these are the pull requests that have been submitted by folks who are not Microsoft employees, okay? We're growing. Check out on the bottom right, the top 10 .NET repositories by percentage community PR. CoreFX has more than 60% of the pull requests that are sent to it are not Microsoft employees. This is healthy. This is growing. This is the stakeholders for our community helping to make it better for everyone, right? Help with our documentation. Help with it growing. Look, 25% of the pull requests to ASP.NET are to improve the documentation that's out there. It's open source. It's available for you to see, work with, change, and your name could appear as an author out there on the documentation. The number of pull requests fluctuates each month. You can see the total number of issues created fluctuates each month, and you can see it's growing. And with the RC2 release that we had there in May, it's spiking, right? Folks are seeing this as getting ready for release, and they're jumping in and helping. A little bit more than 45% of the issues that are created come from the community. And really, most of those issues are going into the .NET organization. About 25% of them come into ASP.NET. That Microsoft wedge down on the bottom, those are folks that are submitting and working with contributing to VS Code, because VS Code, Visual Studio Code, is open source as well. Folks are contributing to .NET all over the world. This is where, according to people's location in GitHub, everybody is located, okay? So they're everywhere, even New Zealand. I only say that because someone criticized us in the past because we accidentally cut off New Zealand when we cropped the map. So even New Zealand, even though you can't see it, there's so many folks in New Zealand that are contributing. Trust me, it's under those pins somewhere. Is it fast? You say it's fast, Jeff, but is it really? So we've been running a performance lab. It's actually a couple of developer desktops that we had in the past year. We took them, threw them under somebody else's desk, and we started running tests against them. Now these servers have 6 processors, but we're seeing when we run our tests against them, 1.1 million requests per second on Windows and 900,000 requests per second on these 6 processor machines. That's pretty impressive when you consider that using that same hardware running against ASP.NET 4.6, we only saw 50,000 requests per second. You can see these benchmarks out on GitHub, ASP.NET benchmarks. When we take this and we look at the standard benchmarks that are out there, someplace called Tech Empower, there's a bunch of different web frameworks out there, and some of these you wouldn't really use. Nobody wants to program their web application in C++. If you're writing HTML in C++, more power to you. That's not for me. I stopped writing C++ a long time ago. But you'll notice all of these frameworks, the second column from the right, they're all Linux, every single one of them. We're going to get .NET in the top 10 here. But notice way down here in the bottom half is Dart, and second from the bottom is Node.js at 300,000 requests per second. When we scale up to the same hardware that these folks are using, which is a 24 processor machine with 64 gig of RAM, man, I wish I had that under my desk as my desktop workstation. We see 3 million requests per second, okay? We have a pull request sitting out there that'll boost that by another 15%. Why didn't we merge the pull request? Because we're trying to ship RTM, and we're going to deliver that capability just after RTM. Cross-platform. You can use any editor you want. So I mentioned Emacs and VI, but you can also use Sublime, Atom, Brackets. Visual Studio Code is built on top of Electron Shell with TypeScript on top of it. We've got Yeoman generators that'll help you build your application, a template version of your application, right from the get-go on Mac and Linux, and you can use them on Windows as well. I'm going to skip out this demo here because I want to get to the announcement. .NET Core is going to release to everybody. 1.0 release, June 27. Okay, you've got 2 weeks, and then 1.0 version will come out. There's lots of folks here that are speaking on .NET Core and the other .NET Framework topics, but you're going to get the 1.0 release of .NET Core, ASP.NET Core, Entity Framework Core, and you're going to get the tooling preview version 2 for Visual Studio 2015. This isn't uncommon for us to publish the runtime and frameworks at a different version number than the tooling. We did this with UWP last year. Windows 10 was released, we had the framework and libraries, and the tooling came out in August, about a month or so later. There's related sessions that I want to make sure you get to later today at the conference so that you can see and work with and take a deep dive into some of these topics, right? So take a look at some of these session numbers, and you can find them on your session catalog and learn more about these topics. Get out there on the net. There's lots of places to learn about it. Here's just 4 places. Go to .net, which is kind of weird to say, .net, and you can see how you can get the new .NET Core and tools so you can install and be ready at RTM. The documentation for ASP.NET, it's open source and publicly available at docs ASP.NET. Our blogs, where we're going to be talking about these new features, and we'll be announcing and talking about the RTM, blogsmsdn.com/.net and /webdev. I'm on Twitter. Let me know if you have any questions. I am at C#Fritz. I will be more than happy to answer your questions. I answer every question that gets submitted to me, unless you ask me something about, I don't know. Anyways. So, or email me. I love getting your emails, and I'm more than happy to respond to them. jefritz@microsoft.com. Thank you very much. My name is Jeff Fritz.